Alone. The word echoed back again and again into the dark recesses of her mind. She was alone. Katherine looked about her and knew there was not a single soul in sight. She was flanked between four large towering buildings, their walls as silent as the streets which echoed from ages past. Alone. Every step she made rang up loudly to her, wore her nerves on edge. The wind brushed her cheek, and she shivered, pulling her coat more tightly about her as she glanced back over her shoulder. What was that sound? Was somebody else there? Her heart raced, but it was only the shadows of ghostly trees which lay behind her, and yet the urge to run intensified. Who's there? She stopped, turning, waiting, boldly in the dark, but nothing came, no one spoke, nothing. Alone. The word flowed up to her again, until she herself began to chant it. Alone, alone, alone. Katherine awoke, trembling. Cat? Myles said in a deep, sleepy voice, as he leaned over his wife. Katherine gulped for air as she opened her eyes and felt her body trembling, felt her chest tightening. She put up her hand to block his when he reached out to touch her. "It's all right, Cat. It's me," Myles said tenderly, with a soothing tone, attempting to reassure his wife that all was well. Katherine shook her head as she weakly tried to ward him off. "It's all right. Look at me, Cat," Myles whispered. "Come on, sweetheart, look at me," he coaxed. "It's me, Myles." Katherine blinked. "Myles?" she whispered, as her eyes slowly began to focus. It wasn't dark any more. Her bedside lamp was on. She was not alone. Myles was there. Katherine swallowed as the air flowed more easily through her lungs. It was a dream, just a dream, she sighed. Myles brushed away the damp strands laying on her brow. He didn't know what to make of her reaction to him. Images conjured up in his mind, but he readily discarded them, forcing his trying thoughts aside. Myles studied his wife's small, trembling form as she lay helplessly beside him. "Are you all right?" he asked, as he looked gravely at his wife, the green orbs of his eyes intensely lingering upon her. Katherine nodded. Myles's fingers moved over her dampened brow, his thumb circling the scar, which was now lightly fading. "Was it a bad dream?" he asked. Katherine nodded again as a chill went up her spine. She saw the trees, heard the howling voice of the wind, and trembled. "Do you want to talk about it?" Myles asked, willing his wife to lean on him, to allow him to do all he could to ease the pain. Katherine shook her head and looked sullenly up at her husband. She didn't know what to make of what she had seen. She didn't understand it. It felt so incredibly real, what her senses had fictitiously meshed together. "You're still shivering," Myles said, as he brushed his thumb over her moist cheek and looked down upon the dampened sheet which had fallen to her waist, along with the dampness of her nightgown. Katherine had broken out in a cold sweat. When Myles moved to further draw down the sheet that covered her, she tightened her grip, keeping the covers in place. "I'm cold," Katherine whispered, as she shivered, with a touch of sleep in her eyes. "I know, love. That's why I have to get you out of this nightgown and into something dry," Myles said, hoping she would willingly comply with what he had suggested. Moments later, Katherine felt his body move off of the bed. Her eyes followed his retreating form. "Myles?" Katherine said in a frightened voice. "Yes, sweetheart." He spoke in a concerned tone. "Don't leave me," she voiced in an alarmed pitch. Katherine was taken by surprise by her words. After all, it was Myles whom she was asking to comfort her. Never in her wildest dreams did Katherine ever imagine she would ever be in need of Myles, nor want him near as she wanted him now. Myles turned around with a reassuring look in his eyes when he heard the nervous plea in her voice. "No, Cat, I won't leave you. I could never do that." "It would break my heart if you left me," he thought. It warmed his heart she asked him to stay. It was a remarkable feeling to be needed by his wife. "Where are you going?" Katherine asked, with a fretful look in her eyes, as they glistened once more with tears. How could Myles leave her when she still felt so frightened? The terror that gripped her only moments earlier still lingered. "I won't leave. I just need to get you a dry nightgown," Myles said gently, as he turned towards Katherine's armoire, pulled open the bottom drawer, and slipped out the pale, sleeveless blue nightgown on top. A whisk of the fragrance she wore still lingered on the fabric of the gown, almost clouding his mind. Promptly he went back to her side. "Now let's get you changed out of this wet gown," Myles said lightly, as he moved to pull away the rest of the covers. "Myles, don't!" Katherine grabbed his wrists in a strong, sturdy grip, his words and actions sending her emotions reeling. He looked down where she held him, then into her eyes. "What's the matter, Kat?" Myles asked as he eased his hold on the sheet. "I'll change. Only—" She looked apprehensively up at him. "If you promise to turn around," Katherine said as her cheeks warmed with color. "You don't want me to look at you?" Myles questioned, astounded by the reality of her words. He watched the stain of color on his wife's cheeks and found her timid actions unsettling. "Please, Myles," her large brown eyes pleaded up at him. "I won't look," Myles promised, willing her to see this with his eyes. "But you will." Katherine's eyes glistened with tears. "This is silly, Kat. We're married. I just want to help you. You can't possibly do this without someone's help." He tried to point out, his eyes drifting to her injured arm. "But I don't want you to undress me." Fresh tears pooled down her cheeks. This all felt so humiliating. Yes, they were married, but she didn't remember. This was all new to her. Myles sighed. He didn't want to upset her any further. Katherine had always been bashful about the intimacies of marriage. Her modesty was his undoing. "All right." He released the sheet.